Well, hello everybody. Thank you guys so much for clicking onto this video. I just wanted to make a video that was sort of illustrating a lot of the points of like why Hydralander is what it is, what's kind of gone into it, a bit of like all the background behind it. And to help me with that, I actually have on one of my close friends that I've been working on really closely with this project. Currently I have on with me Blade Wolf. Go ahead and say hi.
Hello, hello.
Yeah. So Blade Wolf's been helping me on this for the past like 6 months. Like Hydralander in of itself has been a project that I've had on my mind for about like over 2 years at this point. Like back before the pandemic times, and we've been working very hard in order to be able to help this happen and help this become something that we're super happy to have been able to finally release to you guys in the public. So Blade Wolf, I came to you with this idea about 6 months ago in terms of an alternate format, and what were some of your initial ideas about it in terms of like why did you stick with me for like 6 months in terms of helping me work on this?
So, the initial format was 60 card singleton, and I really like pile decks. I really enjoy some of the alternative formats for Yu-Gi-Oh, whether it be like GOAT or like just slower and a little bit more tempo-based games. And the 60 card format certainly appealed to that. It appealed to less archetype driven, less explosive, and I did enjoy that. Having said that, as you can see, the format's changed a little bit, being 30 card singleton now, because you absolutely cannot play archetypes in 60 card. It ended up devolving sort of into finding the best one card starters, whether that be Zodiacs or Prank Kids or whatever. And I think that the format, like as we've put more thought into it, has certainly become a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more powerful.
Oh yeah, definitely big time. Yeah, it's really crazy to think about how far we've been able to come with it from, like as I mentioned in the actual announcement video, a lot of ideas were originally just brought in from like Canadian Highlander and Magic the Gathering, which was I was like max deck size, everything, throw it all in there, kitchen sink style it, but it really, as you mentioned, took away a lot of identity from individual decks since really it was just efficiency of engines. And from there, after especially getting feedback from other people, yeah, I do want to shout out that there were other people who also helped us through this testing phase here. It wasn't just me and Blade Wolf. There have been other people, especially people in the Discord, that have helped give us feedback. So blanket shout out to all of you guys. And one of the things that you mentioned is like we really cared a lot about the being able to play archetypes and or decks that people are particularly fond of. One of the big reasons that I came up with this idea in the first place was, I love my Orchist, completely putting that out there, and with Harp Horror being banned for so long, it's like you don't really have the deck in that full capacity, and a lot of decks go through that sort of cycle. The deck exists, it either does well or it doesn't, key cards get banned out from underneath it, and you're only playing a shadow of what it once was. And I wanted to help create a format where whatever your deck is, like what you love in playing with your deck, that you would be able to find some of that while still retaining some of the innate variance that you're able to get by having the singleton nature of a Highlander format. One of the other big reasons that came up is also very much the idea of getting excited for new cards. A lot of the same idea in terms of like having a archetype that you really care about is that, sometimes Konami comes out with that legacy support. They come out with that new stuff for like, shiny and flashy and Machine of Ruin Force or whatever it is. And if you're doing like a combo of the other sort of like, I could go back and play just Toss format in terms of playing, Orchist as it was at that time, but I wouldn't be able to play with any of the new stuff that has come out, nor would, say, Sky Striker be able to play it with any of the new stuff that has come out.
Yeah, so there are other alternative formats for similar stuff, like Rush Duels, Speed Duels. They have new products being released, but it's not exactly the same. Like a lot of the new stuff coming out for Speed Duels, besides skills, is just like, old cards being put into the format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Shout out to the new Speed Duel boxes coming out, but yeah, that's really what it is. It's them curating the card list with the addition of the skills, and that's Thank you for bringing that up as one of the other big points that we wanted to do. The gameplay, once you sit down, shuffle your deck, cut decks with your opponent, and you pick up your opening hand, it follows the same rules as the regular TCG. There's no additional skills, there's no minimizing of columns or strange zone placements. There's no additional rules of like adding wonkiness of like, maybe you don't draw or second player draws 5 or whatever. Like, there's a lot of other custom formats people have come up with, but sometimes when they change those like core rules, like a lot is different. Like it deviates a lot from the gameplay that might have made made me fall in love with Orcus in the first place, and what might have made you fall in love with a certain archetype in the first place as well. And they just don't work the same under a different set of rules.
Yeah, Singleton has a sort of similar effect in that, some things like Thunder Dragon don't really work. And even archetypes like Virtual World or Lyrilusk, which require multiple names, they don't work exactly the same way that they do in TCG just because of how the consistency works out. Being 30 cards instead of like 40 in our format is sort of like a half measure to make sure that those things still work in some capacity. But occasionally you will find archetypes that don't play out exactly the same way that they do in other formats, even though they still achieve something.
Yeah. That's definitely one of the other major points that has come along in terms of I remember in one of the very early iterations of the format, I did have a very whack rule in place similar to the point system, where you, instead of spending points on just powerful cards, you could also spend a weird variable number of points for extra copies of certain cards. And in terms of balancing it, it ended up becoming very complicated. This is primarily something that happened once I learned about Hydralander, like what Hydralander used to be. They used to have a rule where if a card named itself, you get more copies of it. And I remember hearing from people that basically Reborn Tengu ultimately took over any time period where it was legal, because it was one of the best floaters and you were allowed to run 3 copies of it. So you had the consistency of it, you had the power of it. And while I could, come up with some kind of rule that would iterate on that, and once again, as you guys come into the format, things might change, especially if you guys come in, voice your thoughts about it, voice your opinions on it. We want to get more input in terms of having more people coming in to talk about it. But one of the more major things is like, I didn't want the rule set, or we didn't want the rule set to be too complicated coming right out of the gate. We wanted it to be easy for people to understand the rules, understand what the format's about, and being able to pick up games with it, trying to really work with it. So we didn't have any of those complicated, some cards you get duplicates, other cards you don't, you spend points on some things, you don't spend points on others. So if you guys come in, voice feedback, if we get a lot of testing with additional things, we could try to figure some of that stuff out.
Yeah, if you can come up with an elegant solution for making Thunder Dragons relatively simple to deck build for, and knowing which cards you can have duplicates of, because, we don't want to have you just play every card which has a hard once per turn, because they technically refer to themselves, or, something like that. Or, what if it only can grab itself from grave? Well, you should probably be able to play that one too, right? So it can't just be searching from deck. There's a whole mess of getting into the weeds for cards that refer to themselves, if you want to allow duplicates for those cards.
Yeah. Like, there are cards that imply that you're supposed to have multiple copies of them, but they sometimes work perfectly fine just by themselves. And, for a lot of other situations, it's about having that specialty to them versus having it be something that's more like universal or shared. It really goes back to the idea of, do we want, like, if we allow just cards that name themselves to have, additional copies of themselves, especially if we don't impact the size of the deck in any way, those decks now, circumvent the idea of our, inconsistency, our variability from game to game, because they now just run more copies of the cards that they want to run copies of. So if there's an elegant way of figuring out how to still maintain our variance that we want, allow these cards to work, allow it to balance with the amount of power, and make it not feel like it's an arbitrary power boost to specific decks, that's going to be the big thing that we want to be able to look for in terms of that there. Another one of the very major rules that we came in here is the extra deck size change. Now, this one came in partially with the addition of the smaller main deck size. And I think it was a very elegant solution to have them tied together, where if you have, so as opposed to having the 60 card variance pile, 30 cards singleton, you still get variance in your opening hands, but the major consistency of extra deck cards could almost always allow you to pivot in between whatever it is that you want to do. But by limiting the size of the extra deck based off of how much you put in the main deck, you limit your extra deck either like link spamming or synchro climbing or any sort of those capabilities based off of, well, how much variance are you willing to put into your main deck, and trying to figure out how to balance against that.
Yeah, there's a couple, side effects of reducing extra deck size. So, for example, it's really hard to fit in a Nightmare Phoenix, right? If you want to do link climbing or synchro climbing, the extra deck is just really, really tight. So you end up having less utility in there if you want to do long combo plays, and this is, I think it's an alright compromise, right? It reduces the potential for really long combo plays that would increase the power level of the format, but also just would make turns take longer. It encourages, having shorter combos that get you to a guy, and then having some utility in the extra deck.
Yeah, that's one of the, major things, especially back in the, hashtag make Verte days. When everyone in the TCG was just like, oh, if I just ever get left with 2 bodies, I guess I'll end on a Dragoon, and just sort of like a safety measure. And with a smaller extra deck size, you have to be much more conscious of what are you spending your extra deck slots on? What is it going to cost in terms of your different combo lines, your variability? Are you going to throw everything into your opening turn combo and try to shut them out with 1 to 2 interruptions, with 2 to 3 interruptions? Or are you going to save 2 slots to actually have a follow-up? That's been one of the biggest things we've been running into a lot with the Wombo combo decks, is how much can you have for your opening play, but still have a follow-up in case you get Dark Hold, Regeki, Dark Ruler No More, whatever it is.
Another nice interaction of having a small extra deck is that it encourages you to shuffle cards back in. So, things like Pot of Avarice, things like Transmigration Prophecy, they get a little boost because suddenly, Transmigration Prophecy is not purely for shuffling back your limited copy of, I don't know, Instant Fusion? Or, more importantly, Graveyard Interruption on your opponent. It's also for shuffling back your single Kitkalos, or your single Kagari, your single Verte. Because if your Verte gets impermed, negated by some hand trap, as long as you can shuffle back, your game plan is still sort of available.
Yeah, and you can, try it again. There's a lot of emphasis added onto these recycle tools when you put it in there. And then, as I've also come to learn while playing through the format, also finding the right balance of recycle tools. Because, my friend and buddy, Bladewolf here, has clowned on me many a time for trying to run Jar of Avarice in my decks.
You're just going to lose. I mean, our format is less powerful than modern TCG, but if you just brick with Jar of Avarice and you have 4 cards that do nothing, even if you're not getting killed the next turn, you're getting killed the turn after.
Yeah. And this comes up to one of our final points, is the power of having a points list. So having the power of the points list has allowed us to make a lot of control over what certain decks can do, what they can splash into, and a lot of power level and ceiling options that happen here. For example, at the time that we're releasing this, Tirashizu is one of the strongest decks of the TCG format, and it was equally a powerful deck in Hydralander during our beta testing prototyping phase for the format. And as a result, we up-pointed Kitkalos, we up-pointed Tearlament Rhinoheart, and we made it so that the deck still works. One of our core philosophies here is that you could still run all of the Tearlament cards in one Tearlament deck. You can still do that. But you don't get to then do Access Code Talker. You don't then get to do Boral Sword Dragon. You don't then get to do Apollosa with 4 negates. On the much more powerful archetypes, we lock them into, that will be your archetype's thing. But then, say, for example, the more lower-powered archetypes, say, for example, you're trying to be a Trickstar deck, or you're trying to be, a Crusadia Link Climb deck, then you can start spending your points to be okay, now I need that Apollosa, now I need that Boral Sword Dragon. And it allows us to have both control on how much generic interruptions decks can make going first in their opening turn, as well as very heavily trying to limit the, and now I just kill you on the crackback by making one of these really busted OTK tools. What other thoughts do you have about the point list as we have been working on it?
I mean, I think there's a couple more exciting options for, a Trickstars or other low-power archetypes which aren't currently on the point list. Because they can pick up things like Pot of Greed, something that you can't just play in the TCG. You can pick up Soul Charge, you can pick up, Graceful Charity. You can get all these really powerful draw and consistency tools. Or you can just pick up, good staple cards, Kashtir Fenrir. You can pick up cards which are just crazy, like Fairy Tale Snow. Because you're going to get a decent amount of value out of Fairy Tale Snow in the grind game.
Yeah. And that is the strength of the variability in terms of the point list. And that's where in the opening we're like, it's all about deciding how do you want to spend your points. Do you want to spend your points on a consistency piece like Pot of Greed or Graceful Charity? Do you want to spend your points on additional interruption in Fairy Tale Snow? Do you want to have an off-engine powerful piece like Kashtira Fenrir? Or do you want to have an OTK tool in Boral Sword Dragon? You have all these different avenues in terms of how do I choose to spend my points? And it allows decks that natively don't spend those points. For example, if you're not using Nightmare Mermaid as your main engine, or if you're not using Kit Kalos or one of these very powerful archetype pieces, if you're not using those, you then get the power to spend your points in these different dimensions and try to decide on it. Yeah, and those are very much the major points that we wanted to be able to bring up to you guys in terms of talking about the format. Again, this has been tested by me, Venerzap, and Blade Wolf, and a bunch of other friends in our Hydralander Discord right now, and we are really looking forward to having many more of you guys hop on in. The more of you guys that hop on in, the more data that we'll be able to get. We'll be able to start running tournament series. Then we'll be able to start doing a lot more balance on the format. With additional voices and eyes, maybe we will be able to come up with a reasonable duplicate rule for those decks like, Salamangrates or Lyrilusk, or, if you really want your Reborn Tangos and Nimble Momongas. But being able to try to find ways to do that requires there to be a lot more people joining into the community. So we're really happy to be able to finally be able to reach out to you guys and talk about it. Blade Wolf, is there anything you want to say before we go?
Not particularly. I'm excited to see you all in Discord. I hope to see the format grow and see a few more powerful decks arrive that we won't be able to spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And please, if one of you guys are a Pendulum player, please let us know what Pendulum does in this format.
Surely Electromite does something. Surely.
But we have not been able to figure it out yet. So to all Pendulum pilots, this is a shout out to you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys so much for your time. If you somehow found this video before you found a larger announcement one, go ahead and hop onto that one too. It has links to all of the things as well. It has the, more time invested sort of display in terms of making things look nice. And we'll be so happy to be able to see you guys in the Discord. So thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, please take care.